Thank you very much. I could be at Glastonbury today, but I chose to be here. But I'm going to have a word with my agent, because if I'd have been at Glastonbury, I would have made very sure that the act before me and the acts after me were pretty rubbish. And my agent has sadly let me down. I'm sandwiched between some really excellent stuff. So I'm very cross with Chris. I'm going to be equally cross with Kieran. I'm mildly cross with Jen. Okay. But I know her very well. So my task today is to take you through some ideas that we're developing at the BCRT about new ways for approaching clinical trials. Because I guess everybody in this room would agree that what we need is better treatment than that is available at the moment. Okay? And I want to just take you through one or two ideas we're developing about how we can turn things around a bit in clinical trials and make them more efficient and more rapid. And I'm hoping some slides are going to appear, because I'm a scientist and I can't cope without slides. Have you got some slides? I've got to click. I've got to do my own work. Bloody hell, what next? Thank you very much. And then after that, we're going to have a brief talk about the Lord Saatchi's bill, the innovation bill. Okay? And this is where I would like a little bit of interaction. And I'm going to encroach a little bit on Jen's time when I do that. Okay, so this is Screen and Recruit. And those of you who travel as much as I do kind of know where that is. That's King's Cross Station. And the idea is to give you the impression that these are people waiting for something. And what they're waiting for is a better way of treating certain forms of cancer. So what is the problem we are talking about today? The problem we are talking about are rare cancers in general, but bone cancers in particular. Now, the thing about rare cancers is they're not actually that rare. So if you draw a pie graph like this, anywhere in the world, you will get this sort of distribution of cancer. You'll see that you've got the common cancers, the common killers: lung cancer, breast cancer, colorectal cancer, prostate cancer, stomach cancer, and then eventually the segments get so small on that pie graph that somebody lumps them all together. And they lump them together as other. Okay? And the other is usually 25-35% of the total. So the most common form of cancer is rare cancer, if you like. Okay, and there's a very good paper come out. We like scientific papers in the science world. And that actually looks at the situation of rare cancers in Europe in particular. It gathers together all the evidence that we know out there from existing studies about these forms of disease. And they came up with a definition of what is rare cancer, something that occurs at less than 6 in 100,000 people, which means across the whole of Europe there's less than 30,000 people presenting every year. However, there are over 4 million people walking around in Europe at the moment who have a rare form of cancer. So actually, it's quite common. There are about 186 different flavours of rare cancer. So in other words, you've got a lot of people who've got an unmet need. The really important thing is the outcome for those patients is actually not as good as for the common tumours overall. Within those groups, of course, there are some tumours that are actually easy to treat, but most of them are not. I can tell you why, because what happens, and some of you in this room will have personal experience of this, you present with your rare cancer, your doctor's quite interested in you because you're unusual. They haven't seen one of those for a while, and therefore they get all their friends together and say, "Look at this, isn't this unusual? I haven't seen one of those before." You as a patient or a relative will say, "That's interesting, doctor. What are you going to do about it?" "Oh, I don't know. We don't have enough. They're rare. What do we do?" So how do we tackle this problem? The other thing about rare cancers is, as you know, I look around the room, the evidence is before me, that actually the children's cancers and the cancers in younger people are almost all of them within the rare group, even leukemia is. And this is a distribution curve of cancer incidence according to whether it's rare or common. You can see the common tumours, by and large, are more common the older you become. So cancer generally is a disease of old age, generally. If you look in red, you'll see the distribution for the rarer cancers, and it's distributed across the whole age range. So I have heard today, for example, that bone cancer can indeed happen at older ages, and we've heard a personal witness to that fact. But the younger patients are often in the rare group, usually in the rare group. Okay, that's the problem. Easy. What about the solution? Okay, so the usual way that you do drug development in a drug company is that you spend millions of pounds identifying a new drug target. Okay, and Donald this morning would have talked about how that's done. So you gather lots of information, you get your drug target, and then you have lots of very clever chemists who will identify that target and turn it into a drug. During that process, they'll patent it to make sure that they don't lose any money, and then they'll go and say, right, okay, we need to go and find some patients to try this new drug on. And that takes years and lots of money. So the idea of Screen and Recruit is just to change this around slightly. It's to put the patient first. The patient first in the process. The patient should always be first in what you're trying to do. And to take samples from the patient, to screen them using the modern techniques of molecular biology in particular, which enable you to produce a unique signature for an individual patient and an individual tumour type. You do that first. You don't know at that time what you're going to find. Most of these tests that have been done to date show that usually there's 20 or 30 different abnormalities in that unique signature, which may be drug targets. And in some cases, the drugs are there. In some cases, the drugs aren't there yet, but the drug companies are working on them. So you get that. You then put that on a database which is going to be available for drug companies to look at, and then they go to the catalogue, so it's like going to Argos and say, I need very quickly 50 patients who've got this particular mutation. And I'm looking in my database and, whoops, there's one. They've done the recruitment without having to go outside of their office. That saves a lot of money. Okay, sorry, lots of words on this slide, but I think it hopefully sums up the idea again. Obtain the consent of the patient at diagnosis to be approached again, right? And this is really important. I think sometimes researchers are unduly nervous about talking to patients about what they want and what they would be able to do for the researcher. So instead of just saying, can I have a sample and I'm not going to come back to you again, what you do is you have a sample and you say, I might find something in your particular tumour which will be a drug target. Is it okay if I approach you again? So are you going to be upset if you get a letter from me in a year or two's time saying I found something? Okay? And patients are fine with that, and ethics committees are fine with that. Okay, you get your tumour sample and you screen it using the most sophisticated tests you've got at the moment and you can afford to do. You keep that DNA in your laboratory, so if a drug company says, I found a new target and your test hadn't shown it, you can very rapidly run all your samples through and find that new target in that group of patients. And you allow pharmaceutical companies access to that database. We have to be grown up about pharmaceutical companies. We all love to make snidey comments about how much money they make. But actually, that's where the drugs come from. Very few, if any, drugs are developed purely outside of a pharmaceutical industry. What they need to be done is to encourage to reduce their costs, and one way of doing that is to reduce their risk. So it's not so risky for them if you've already got the data. They don't have to go out and find all these patients for themselves, which costs them a lot of money and is quite risky. So it's risk sharing. And this is where the charitable sector and the government can help to work with pharmaceutical companies to encourage them to do something they don't really want to do, which is to develop drugs for small numbers of people. Okay? So if you're an investor in a pharmaceutical company, you would want to have a blockbuster drug which is going to cure as many people as possible, and you can charge as much as you like. So you have to encourage the pharmaceutical industry to get involved in this very segmented market. And this is a way that you can do it. The other thing I need to think about is what I call mechanism-based trials. So historically, we've always lumped tumours together by the part of the body in which they occur, because that's what doctors do. You've got a bowel cancer, you've got a breast cancer, you've got a prostate cancer. They must all be the same. Now, actually, they're not. And if you look at them in detail, you can have more similarities between a tumour arising, say, in the breast and one arises in the prostate than sometimes between the same anatomical location. So the idea of developing a mechanism-based approach, one which says if you've got a mutation in different sites, it's probably going to respond to your drug even though it's in a different anatomical site. It's a different way of thinking, okay? And for rare cancers, in my opinion, it's probably one of the few ways we can make an advance, is to encourage people to cross barriers. There are scientific reservations with that. We know that actually a mutation in one sort of anatomical site may respond to a drug to a mutation in another anatomical site. But this is a way of finding that information out. There's a complexity there. We wouldn't do it if it was an ideal world, but it's not an ideal world, is it? Okay. And we need to have agreement between those tumour specialists about what makes a good response. And that shouldn't be too difficult, but it does pose problems, because if you're looking at a particular tumour site, you can say a good response is a shrinkage by this amount, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. You have to compare what happens in a prostate cancer, for example, with what happens in a colon cancer. You might have some challenges, but they're challenges. And without facing those challenges, we'll kind of get stuck, won't we? So what the advantage would be? The time to recruitment and the cost of recruitment would be reduced. There'd be more rapid evaluation. And this is the other big thing I want to try and get across to you. Many clinical trials are designed to detect small changes. And in certain circumstances, that's entirely justified. So if you want to design a slightly better blood pressure tablet, you're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of patients to demonstrate your blood pressure tablet is slightly better than your rival company's blood pressure tablet. It may reduce the blood pressure better, and it might have fewer side effects. Big trials, okay? And blood pressure, although it's a serious problem, if it's controlled with existing drugs, is not as life-threatening as it used to be. Choosing my words carefully, because it's not a trivial problem. Whereas, all as you know only too well, some of these very difficult to cure cancers, the stakes are an awful lot higher. Okay? So it's a question of getting risk versus reward, I'll come back to that, but also wanting to see big effects. So do you want to have a trial which shows a 3% change in outcome? What you want is a trial that shows a 30% change in outcome, a 50% change in outcome. And I liken this a little bit to a story my father told me. He was in the war, Second World War, and he was in Burma. And Burma's quite hot and sticky, and a lot of his colleagues used to get relatively minor wounds from the war, which became infected and killed them. Okay? And then towards the end of the war, the miracle drug of the 1940s became available to the troops, and that was penicillin. And he tells me that he knew if one of his colleagues got penicillin after having an infection, they would live, and if they didn't, they would die. In other words, the effect was massive. So in an ideal world, you're looking for big effects. And my proposition is that we want to get through more drugs quickly to find the ones with the bigger effects. And to an individual person, obviously that's what they're keen on too. Okay. I think the other advantage of this, which is really important, is greater patient involvement. I really, really find attending these sorts of events fantastically valuable to me. I could be at Glastonbury, I could be at home. I'm probably about the right age to go to Glastonbury. But actually coming here and getting an infusion of enthusiasm and, to use a rather corny word, love, is great for me. So I go back inspired. It's worth quite a few bob in the pay packet for me. And greater patient involvement is something I think which improves the quality of the research, but also improves the sense of urgency that goes with it. We'll come on to that in a second when I talk about the Saatchi Bell. And the other thing is I believe it would give patients a bit more in the way of hope. Hope's a difficult word, and it shouldn't be confused with false expectation. all right? And distinguishing between those two is really important to me. I wouldn't want anybody to think that this approach would automatically lead to better treatments, but it would improve the dialogue that occurs between the pharmaceutical industry, the research community, and the patients. It's a three-way thing. We can only make progress by working together as equal partners. So how do you make it happen? Oh, that's easy. Okay, so we need to develop a patient register of rare tumours, and we can do that in a variety of ways, and we'll explore with BCRT how we might be able to push that forwards. And we've heard the importance of biobanking. It's a huge passion of mine, biobanking. I think it is really important, and as we heard this morning in one of the great talks that were given about the science underneath all this, access to primary material, to actually patient material, is really, really important. And obviously for this project is central. We need to think of ways of rapidly screening those in a cost-efficient way. It's still quite expensive, but that's coming down as we speak. Public engagement and consultation, we're doing some of that today. And engaging those pharma partners, the pharmaceutical industry. Now, people make a mistake of thinking that companies, like a pharmaceutical company, are like people. They've got emotions and they have feelings. Well, they don't actually, do they? They're organisations which are driven by money, fundamentally. The people working in those organisations are just like you and me, and indeed there are some in the audience today. So we have to negotiate with what they have to do, which is keep their stakeholders happy, their shareholders, right? And I think there are ways that we could do this by suggesting to them there's this great big market out there, right? And we're taking some of the risk involved in drug development, and wouldn't it be great to work together? There is money to be made for the pharmaceutical industry out of these rare diseases. It's happened on several occasions now. And so the door is a little open. And also the government have done their bit in letting some of the regulatory things a bit cheaper for rarer cancers, orphan diseases. So there's a feeling that there's encouragement around developing these drugs for rare diseases. Okay, and I'm going to hit you with something which I'm sure you'll all agree with me, that many patients with rare cancers will die waiting if we don't do something about it fairly soon. Okay, so that was the first part of my talk. Happy to take questions on that, or we could do the Saatchi bit now.
Just quickly ask, it looks to me that part of the problem for companies to invest in rare cancers was the period of exclusivity that they had in order to regain their investment. Do you see that as a problem?
Yeah.
Do you see that any way of change?
So there have been moves in certain parts of the world to extend that exclusivity. So one of the sweeteners to the drug companies is if they're working on that sort of thing, they can double the time of exclusivity. And I suppose there'd be ways of different formula for that in terms of if you had a rare disease multiplied by that you'd have a longer dispensation.
Number of cases.
Yeah, or turnover or whatever. So I mean, that's an interesting way of doing it, absolutely. Anybody? It was a big lunch, wasn't it? So when I looked at the programme, I thought, oh, great, thanks very much, Julie. That's a second day after a full lunch, which was advertised, don't hold back. Make sure you're as dozy as possible, because we got the bearded professor afterwards. You can have a doze after then.
You talk about the screen and recruit, a great idea. Can you tell us, is it happening?
Yep, to a certain extent it is. So only in the last few weeks I've been talking to colleagues working in the childhood cancer field, and this is, in essence, what they would like to do. They talk about also something called basket trials, where you have lots and lots of drugs all being tried out under the same ethical approval without having to go back and get a new approval, and it's like a sort of continuous drug trial, which cuts down the bureaucracy. So there's a lot of ideas around new trial design and understanding that you can actually have trials of one patient if you design it properly and you gather all the data. So there's a lot of interest and enthusiasm about this, and I think it's not an original idea entirely. So it's building on lots of similar thoughts. Okay, if you're happy, we'll pass on to Maurice Saatchi's innovation bill. So I've got involved with this through somebody I'm sure many people in this audience will know, Debbie Binner, whose daughter had Ewing sarcoma. And because Chloe was 17 3/4, she wasn't able to go into a drug trial because she wasn't 18. And Chloe unfortunately died about 1.5 years ago. And Debbie previously worked in Sky News, so she was quite savvy about the sort of media world, as well as obviously being a highly intelligent and very motivated person. And Debbie has been campaigning hard to get those sort of artificial barriers sort of at least thought about more carefully. And she's a very powerful advocate. And she introduced me to the Innovation Bill. And Maurice Saatchi's wife, Jill Hunt, I think, died about 1.5 years ago as well. And she had ovarian cancer. And Lord Saatchi had to go and visit her in hospital and could see what many of you in this audience know personally or at the bedside, go through pretty tough chemotherapy. And unfortunately, that wasn't successful in her case. And he decided that he wanted to do something to accelerate the rate of innovation within medical treatment. Originally, it was just cancer, but now it's actually been broadened out to other areas. And his strong feeling is that one barrier to innovation is nervousness on behalf of the treating doctor, that they're going to be prosecuted for not rigidly following guidelines. And he felt that many members of the medical profession are hampered by that, and wanted to introduce safeguards for somebody who basically wanted to go off-piste and try something a little different. And in my mind, the difference is between a clinical trial, which is cold and heartless, and the individual circumstance. Everybody in this room who's been personally involved, I think, will know what I'm talking about. So, and it's caused quite a lot of controversy. I've been happy enough to support what he's trying to do, but many of my colleagues have disagreed, and they have some concerns. And that's what I wanted to in all fairness, to put past you. One thing which I'm absolutely adamant about, and I have seen appear in the press, is that because Maurice Saatchi is Saatchi and Saatchi, as you know, an advertising agent, a very successful one associated with particular political affiliation, which not everybody agrees with. Therefore, he must be a slippery sod. He's not, right? He's a human being. And one thing about this, it brings everybody to the same table, doesn't it? And Maurice Saatchi is at the same table as most of you in this room are. So I'll be very upset if people think that he's doing it because he's for political gain or personal aggrandizement or anything like that. I've met him a couple of times. I've not really felt that. So the debate about whether the bill's a good thing is fine, but I think that sort of attack is not on really. Okay, so as has happened, it's sometimes these things develop into a bit of a dialogue at the deaf, right? So people have taken positions, and one of the things we did yesterday, which some of you attended, was the hat exercise. Okay, and so people don't do this in real life. They don't have a black hat where they all think of the negative things and a white hat where they all think of the positive things. They decide where they stand, and then they argue till they're blue in the face to defend it. Okay, what I call the dialogue of the deaf, and it's beginning to happen a little bit around this. One thing it has done is to shaken the medical profession out of a fair degree of complacency, I think, about all this. I've come across this wonderful statue. It's in Berlin. So I was just walking down the street and past this. I thought that's going to be useful. It's just amazing. Fancy living next door to that. So this is, I think, what a lot of us have done. They've stuck their head in the wall and ignored the debate about how slow things are happening in certain areas. Okay, so I've listed one or two pros and cons. So black hat, white hat. Okay, so we go for the white hat on the left. Outcomes in some diseases remain poor, and it's not just about cancer. Okay, so we're all going to agree that. Progress is slow, so the bill may make that happen more quickly. Individuals only have one chance. So unlike when you're just a number on someone's trial, just a dot on someone's graph, this is you or your loved ones. Randomized to standard ineffective treatment is unattractive for lethal diseases. And I circulated a link to a wonderful piece of work done by the melanoma support group, which really articulates the frustrations of being an individual who's randomized to the control group. Okay, the control group is usually the control group because it's not very good. And that's the tough thing about randomized trials. And assessment of the risk should definitely include the views of the individual, not the person, exclusively the person who's looking after them. Against, it's a quack charter, okay? People are saying it's enabled people who want to sell snake oil to people and exploit them. And there are some people out there who will exploit you for everything you have got. And I'm sure many of you have found that by looking on Google on what is available. Some of it is okay, alternative, and therefore possibly valid. But if it comes with a huge cost, there's usually somebody on the make. There's no need, because the bill has real problems, lack of new therapies. To a certain extent, that's true. New drugs coming through is what we really need. Innovation around this is going to be all dependent on that. The bill, therefore, in the opinion of people against it, is irrelevant. The bill will hamper research because it will get in the way of proper, well-conducted clinical trials. There's a real point to be made about that, okay? And mechanisms are being thought of in which the anecdotal evidence from treating a person in an individual way can be gathered and used. Now, anecdote is a bit of an insult in medicine and in clinical trials, but actually a lot of medicine is anecdotal. It's information passed on from one person to the other. It's a question of capturing it, I think. But it's a valid point. And as I said before, it's politically motivated and a PR stunt after all. Okay. So that's presented to you as an individual where you think you sit on the debate. Okay. A lot of it is risk versus reward. Isn't the internet a wonderful thing? So if you're writing a talk, you can just go risk versus reward, and all sorts of incredible images sort of pop up. And there's a couple of the more sort of presentable ones. They come up. What's this mouse doing? I'm not so sure that helmet's going to be much good. But never mind. And the cat, I quite like the cat. So it's a question of balancing risk versus reward. And I think that comes down to a debate between the treating physician and the patient and their families. And that doesn't always happen. Okay. So I've presented to you some of the debates about the SARTI bill. Here you've got the two views. I just had to get this picture in somehow. The two views. I didn't put a white hat and a black hat. I'm more than happy to take any questions on that, or more than happy to sit down and shut up so you can all go home, whichever you prefer. The choice is yours.